Hi, everyone. Day 2 of Portal Talks 2024, and we have Lou Bichard from Gitpod that will be talking about all the things you should not do when announcing everything. So if you are planning to do an all-hands meeting to show your portal, it's not a good idea, according to Lou, and he'll take us through all of it. Feel free to put any questions into the Q&A. And as always, we'll be recording this and be sending the recording. So Lou, take the stage and good luck.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ronnie. So yes, hello everyone. So I will be talking a lot about sort of portals, platform as a product, and adoption and challenges inside of platform engineering team. So the title of my talk is Behold, the new developer portal in all its glory. I will divulge a little bit more about what this means in just a second, but just first, so yes, my name is Lou. I started off my career as a software engineer. I found my way into platform engineering shortly after that, and then I now work in product management. So it'll explain a little bit about why today I'm talking to you about platform engineering and product. So my journey started with platform, at least started around 2019 when I joined DAZN as a software engineer. Found my way into a developer experience team that was part of our wider platform group. And then around 2021, so a couple of years ago, I then moved into Gitpod, and Gitpod is a developer environment company, and we also serve platform teams. So still staying within the sort of platform circle, but from a slightly different perspective.
Lou, do you want to share your slides?
Oh, is it not showing for you?
No.
Oh, it's knocked it off. Okay, 1 second. Bear with me. Can you see it now? If I do this?
We see that now. Yeah.
Okay. I'll quickly go back through that. So, title of the talk, my name is Lou. Here's the timeline of my career from 2019 into 2021. And yes, cool. So basically, I think you've heard already so far in the conference about this idea of platform as a product, which principally comes down to this idea of what can platform engineering, internal platform engineering, learn from commercial or more formal product management. Certainly some of it applies and some of it doesn't, but what of that the aspects of product management could we take and apply into platform engineering? So today I'm going to take you through 4 different stories span the past of my career. So 2 from my previous life in platform engineering, 2 working in products. And then from that, I have a few different learnings, and then I'll give you a few tips along the way. Now, before I get into the first story, I just wanted to just go back to my title real quick, just for a second. So this idea of behold the developer portal in all its glory. So as I've worked with platform teams, as I've been in platform teams myself, when it comes to implementing, rolling out and adopting a new capability, I have observed things that I've done in my own past and with customers that I work with today, that we have this tendency when we pick up a new tool that we think when we showcase this at some sort of engineering all hands or company all hands, that showing the engineers the sort of capabilities that we've built will lead to driving adoption. And sometimes if we have challenges getting developers to use a specific tool, we think if we just put out more demos, if we just show people and excite them. But what typically happens in that case is we have a rush of developers, maybe 20 or 30 or 100, depends on how big your company is, into, let's say, your developer portal or your new capability. They poke around, they have a look at some stuff, and then eventually, I don't know, their manager comes, taps them on the shoulder, asks them how they're progressing with their Jira ticket, and all of a sudden they're off focusing on something else, and their attention is no longer on the portal or the tool that you have rolled out or this capability. So I'm going to talk a little bit across some different stories about how we can focus a little bit on our developers, we can focus on the problems that our developers have and how that affects our adoption, and why, for instance, some of these strategies about just going out there and running all hands sometimes are quite ineffective for platform teams in driving adoption to tools like developer portals or other capabilities. So back when I was working in DAZN, when I transitioned into what was then our platform team, I was working on the front end sort of internal platform. And this is the screenshots taken from a talk that Max gave, one of our principal engineers, quite some years ago. We're talking about building 250 different single page applications, front end packages. Those were deployed across different targets, different TVs, devices, different countries and languages. So rather than having sort of a runtime dynamic change of those assets, we used to build them and then deploy them to different areas. The front end teams then had to navigate deploying those different artifacts into the different environments and making sure that they didn't break anything and ensuring that things had deployed. Now, it was common that they would go and deploy certain artifacts and it would break, or they didn't know what was actually deployed into which different environments. This obviously led to a lot of frustration from the engineers, and they obviously wanted to improve that situation. Now, we had a deployment dashboard that had been built internally, just kind of put together, that would help with this deployment process. A simple HTML page that essentially would make requests. Those requests would call a series of Lambda functions and some AWS infrastructure to move assets about. So after doing some surveys with developers, we found that obviously people were struggling with this piece of infrastructure. So at this point, we had kind of a fork in the road. Now, as typical platform teams at this point, you know that there's a problem here, and it's so tempting to just jump into, all right, well, let's solve this problem. Let's cut some code. Let's spin up a repo. Let's start to build something out, some solution. We're going to ship it and then see what impact that has. What we did in this particular case is we actually went out to one of the different front-end teams, and we found that they had, in their frustration with the deployment dashboard that we had, is they actually started building a sort of hacked prototype mock-up of their own, because they were so sort of frustrated with the existing tooling that they wanted to at least try and do something themselves to improve the situation. So what we essentially did is we took one of that engineers from that team. We managed to negotiate with their managers just for a short secondment into the platform team. So they came and worked with us for a couple of months, and we worked alongside them to build out this new capability alongside the platform team. Now, this experience of actually seconding someone into the platform team has now formed into something that I constantly recommend, and we used repeatedly after that point in time. It's typical for platform teams sometimes to work on your own or in isolation, but bringing engineers and context into the team as you're building out a capability can really improve the quality of the thing that you're trying to roll out. Now, what this experience taught me was a couple of things. Now, the first one is that this idea that home-rolled solutions signal high pain. Now, throughout this entire talk, I will be zoning in on this particular point, which is that it's vitally important as a platform team that we locate the biggest sources of pain for our internal organization. Now, what I mean by that is we need to look for areas where developers are maybe suffering the most, or we have the biggest leverage, or we can produce the biggest improvement. And we have to be careful jumping to solutions when we don't understand if there is a high enough degree of pain. Without a high enough degree of pain, that's where we sometimes have adoption problems, because we're trying to force a solution where maybe the problem isn't that big. It's an issue, but it's not too big of an issue. However, if we see home-rolled solutions, if people are trying to actively solve their own problem, that is a huge indicator that as a platform team, there is a high amount of pain in that area. And if we dive on those areas and we roll out solutions for those areas, adoption is a lot simpler. The other thing here as well, they're doing this rota idea where we bring engineers into our platform team is a hack for adoption. It's an amazing hack, because what we get is we get two things. We get context of how those developers actually use that capability. So if this is something inside of your portal, maybe you're rolling out the idea of ephemeral environments or provisioning infrastructure, it's really important to understand the nuances of how your developers might interact with that capability. Having someone in the team really helps you. And I remember stories of we were making decisions about how we should deploy certain artifacts, and we're thinking, oh, wouldn't it be cool if they did it in bulk this way? And what we end up finding is the engineers say, hey, hold on, no, that's not actually how we do it. We deploy in this kind of way because for these reasons. And all of this context surfaces that you wouldn't have thought about otherwise, but having someone very close to hand really helps with that. And the second is not to be overlooked is trust. By having someone in the platform engineering team building out that capability with us, when we go back to that individual team and we start to roll out that capability, we've already got the trust of that first team. We've already got their buy-in. We've already got their excitement about this capability that's coming, because obviously you keep that contact, the engineers talking with that team, even when they're on secondment into the platform team. And then once you've got that first team, you've got a perfect archetype or a model of where your capability is working well, and then you can start to roll it out to some of the different teams. Now, at some point along that journey comes the opportunity where you might want to run this all-hands meeting, this demo, and showcase what you've built. But you probably only want to do it after you've proved out that your capability is having an impact for at least one or two teams. And then you can showcase them. Rather than you as the platform team taking to the stage and talk about your capability, the engineers can do it themselves and talk about the benefits that they've received from using your platform tool. Now, a super quick one, because obviously I know lots of platform folks, we're not from UX backgrounds or things like that. So there's actually a book by Jake Knapp called Sprint, which details how to run a design sprint. So across a single week, you can basically define your problem, understand the context, create some wireframes, some mockups, do some sketches. And this is what we also ran with some of those front-end teams. So if you're not familiar with that type of process, just take the book, steal some ideas, run your own workshops, and it will help you get a better understanding of the problems that you're trying to solve. Now moving on to a second story. I just saw it online. I think Abhi Noda was doing a presentation in day one, and he published on LinkedIn recently about this idea that most platform teams or internal sort of DevX initiatives come out of improving CI/CD functionality, which is interesting because that's definitely one of the first areas that I started out when I was doing platform engineering as well. Speaking of CI/CD, at the time we were running a very old version of Drone. It was a deprecated version. They were shifting to an upgraded version, changing their pricing, and we needed to move away from our current CI. In addition to that, a lot of developers were missing the capabilities of that CI that they got used to in different, more sophisticated tooling in the past. It was a huge problem. Developers constantly would come to us and tell about the difficulties they had with the CI system, but we couldn't make a decision. We had looked at Jenkins, we looked at TeamCity, we looked at Travis or all the different CIs at the time, but ultimately we couldn't get to a consensus about what we were actually going to go forward with. Eventually, similar to the first scenario, we actually had a few engineers that started hacking around on GitHub Actions at the time. This is when GitHub Actions had just moved into GitHub and was coming out as new capability. That team was really finding some momentum using GitHub Actions. It came to us and said, could we migrate to this as our new CI? Now, another platform engineer came to me at this time and asked me this question that has stuck with me ever since, which is they said, do we have a sort of spreadsheet where we've kind of analyzed all of the different vendors in the market? Like, have we looked at all the different tools, broken this down by dimension, figured out exactly sort of analytically which is the best tool that we should go for with this sort of CI? Now that stuck with me ever since because there is something to that where as engineers, I think we want to be diligent. We want to do our homework. We want to be prepared. But when it comes to this situation where you might have reached a deadlock across your organization, once you get that initial sort of momentum from engineers, we sometimes have to ride that. It's like a wave for our own adoption, and we have to attach onto it. Yes, there might be other solutions out there in the market that might be a more, on paper, perfect solution for what we need. But sometimes that momentum is worth more than a perfect decision. So now moving on to third example, and we're shifting forward a little bit more into current day for me, which is the company called Gitpod, which I work for. Now at Gitpod, we create automated developer environments. And I'll run this GIF through here, which gives you a rough idea. It's not the entire product, but it gives you an idea of what Gitpod does, which is essentially you spin up environments, we automate in all the different packages, secrets, everything that you need in order to be productive as a developer, including the IDE, things like that, and then you can get up and running. Now, when I joined Gitpod, we were going through and looking at some of our onboarding journey. Now, if anyone has ever spent any time, sort of watching users use your product and looking at things like onboarding and like how they discover and learn about your products, it looks pretty much like this GIF, which is like this guy completely failing miserably to drink. And this is what, sort of the thing that we were seeing with our own sort of onboard process as well. So we started trying to improve the way that users found and understood our capability within the product. One of the things that became apparent over time was the fact that the more that we hooked into existing mental models for users, or the more times we could find ourselves putting little hooks inside of developers' existing behaviors, the easier it was for developers to use our product. One of the most popular integrations that we have is a simple browser extension that merely adds a button into a repository on GitHub. You follow that button and it launches a dev environment for you. However, that just reduces the amount of friction it takes for developers to kind of step through and actually launch development environments within Gitpod. To get to this insight, we actually ran a series of usability studies. Now, I feel like whenever I mention something as formal as something like a usability study, especially like in platform engineering, the immediate reaction is we don't have time for that. We can't do that. That's very heavy-handed. Like we have a small team. We need to move quickly. We need to show results. But actually over 25 years ago, the Norman Nielsen user experience group actually proved out that you can find the majority of usability issues with your product or feature with just conducting 5 usability studies. A usability study can be very simple. All it comes down to is basically asking your user to perform an action. That could be using your product, going through your portal, for instance, going through a capability, scaffolding out a new repository, and you just observe them as they go through that process. And as they go through it, you ask them just to speak aloud, tell you what they're thinking, and you prompt them as they go. You try not to lead them too much because you want to understand, how do they behave? What would they do if they're in the real world on their own? And this just gives us deep insight and understanding into how our users are actually using our product. And it can help us make decisions about what we should do in terms of our capabilities. Now, surveys and some of these other tools are very common inside the platform ecosystem. But when we run a survey, we get a very thin snapshot into what our users might actually be doing. So by doing interviews or actually observing our users in their context, looking at their behaviors, can give us rich data into what our users actually want from our platform capabilities. Going back to the previous point I mentioned about zoning in on problems, you can use this to great effect as well. If you're thinking about rolling out a portal or different capabilities, you can take those capabilities like scaffolding a new service or improving your onboarding flow and just observing what developers do today and identifying the biggest points of friction so that you can fold that into your new capability if you're rolling that out, let's say, through a portal. A couple of things that I learned from this. The first one is, especially with these usability studies, is that solving problems for real people is incredibly motivating. As a platform team, it's easy to feel like you're an internal cog in the system. You're a couple of levels of abstraction away from the actual business value to the business customers, but we do have customers internally. And what I find is when there are videos or clips of those internal users, that can be really exciting if you're an engineer on that team watching users using your actual product. And spoiler, but it will be quite like that GIF from before where they will be tripping over themselves. However, there's a famous story also from back in the day with Google in the early days where I think they had some issue with their search results. And one of the original founders of Google just went into one of I think it was into the lunchroom and stuck a sign up on the wall saying, just with a screenshot of these sort of poor search results. And there's this story about those engineers then spending several days to solve that problem. And I've observed this exact same effect myself when we do usability studies. When you've got that video and you've got a real person on the end of your platform capability using it, observing that and seeing a real person in real life can really engage you at a level that you can never get if you're just looking at a PRD or a Jira ticket or something like that. So that's one thing that's worth definitely leveraging as well. And the second part of that is also starting with interfaces that developers have today. So if we're looking at rolling out a capability, we should look at where are our developers spending their time? What are they actually doing in their day-to-day? And how can we find ways to integrate, let's say, our portal or other capability into the interfaces that they already use? These could be inside of their editor. This could be building editor extensions or IDE plugins. If you have a CLI, you can build those commands into that, let's say, to redirect them to different locations. Or taking the example from before, building browser extensions to put buttons or integrate into the tools that developers use. Turns out it can sometimes be quite difficult to get a developer or anyone actually to change their behavior. We're people of habit. We do the things that we do on a daily basis out of routine and habit. So if you're rolling out a new interface, a new portal, a new tool, it can take a little bit of a time for people to adjust their behaviors. However, if you can bake those capabilities into your existing interfaces, you can just speed up that adoption curve by leveraging the behaviors that users are actually doing today. Now, if all this talk about user research has your head kind of spinning, as mentioned usability studies and all of this stuff, there's actually a great YouTube channel, book, and course by this man called David Travis. It's typically sort of UX user research stuff, but I think it's incredible as an on-ramp for platform people. So if you're curious about user research, how to get insights, interviewing your users and understanding their needs, this is a great place to start. His YouTube is obviously free. He has a course on Udemy, a book. I'm not affiliated. I just think it's really good content. And I think if you're interested in that type of thing, it's a really good on-ramp. Now, my fourth and final story that I'll share with you today. So when I go out into the community and I talk about, for instance, the Gitpod capabilities, or I'm talking about dev tools, one common question that I often get is, how can I pitch this product to my boss? Which is a valid and fair question, but I think my answer to the question is probably not what people might think, which is that I don't think you should. What I mean to say is that it's very important actually to zero in again on what are the problems that your organization has. And then when it comes to building a pitch or talking about building a capability for your organization, you really need to know, what is the problem that we're solving? What is the pain that we're addressing for developers? In the previous examples, it was those issues around deployment dashboard. How can we quantify that? How can we figure out, is this causing us issues? How much time is being spent by our developers on this? How much time are they wasting? Is it causing production outages? Is it causing other types of disruption? What is the real ROI of actually solving that problem? That's what we have to do first. And as a platform community as a whole, I think it's something that we generally could improve on, is really spending a bit of time on understanding the ROI of something before we embark on it. The same is true for portals. The same is true for every developer tool, everything within the platform ecosystem. We want to quantify as much that pain as much as possible, not just because doing an ROI is best practice, but actually it makes our life easier. And this is one of the learnings that I've had certainly over the last couple of years, especially in a more commercial context, is quantifying that pain or the challenge that you might be having is really important. It's really important before we even think about solutions. Do we want to build this? Do we want to buy it? Do we build it at all? Do we invest in this? Or even looking at costs. It's very typical that we start to think about costs quite early. What would this cost? What would be the cost of running this infrastructure, let's say? Cost is important, but so is the return. What is the benefit? What is the pain? What is the time and the energy that we are spending on this? Because once you've got that, you can start to justify the cost. It's important then to balance those two, but we should think as well just about the problem as well as we think about the cost of a different tool. And as I say, choosing the right problem actually avoids adoption pains. It's one of the best hacks that we possibly have. If you pick the right problem to solve, problems that developers actually have, and problems that are real and acute and painful now, then we avoid those adoption problems. If you're having adoption problems, it's typically because we haven't found the right problem, or we haven't found a way to frame that problem when we go out to our developers and explain why they should use our portal. We need to find a story that's going to resonate with our developers, and that comes from figuring out what is the pain that they're going through, what is the difficulties that they have that we're solving for. So going back to the title of this talk, I hope by the end of this that I've inspired you to maybe look into some alternative paths rather than rushing very first into building out your solution and running to present that to your organization. Say, okay, behold, our new dev tool in all its glory. And instead look at some of these different techniques. So speaking to users, watching them in their context, hooking into their existing behaviors, rotating them into your platform team. All of this is going to help solve those later sort of adoption problems down the line. And that's it. Thank you very much. And
Thank you very
thank you,
much, Lou. And if there are any questions, this is a time to ask them. But if not, we will close the recording and we'll put it online. Any questions I should ask you, Lou?
Any questions you
Just
should.
type them in the chat and I'll repeat them to you, or
no, not necessarily.
not necessarily. I think my main takeaway is the immense thoughtfulness required to deliver something that is good. The issue is not the tool, is really figuring out the people and process that you want to deliver. So the tool question was in the CI/CD choice in the initial days of the platform, but then later on, it's really about thinking what people really need to have once you have those basics.
Yes, precisely. I mean, the tool and the solution certainly plays into this, but I think sometimes if we put too much emphasis on it, we think that the tool is going to, it doesn't matter how shiny I think the tools are that we use. Even the best tool, kind of put forward in not the best way inside your organization is going to struggle. So I think it's really important how we present that and the timing of which we present different dev tools inside of our organization, and the narrative then that we sort of share around that, like why are we introducing this and what's the purpose? I've seen many, I've seen many platform initiatives, certainly where, you know, we get really excited, you roll out a solution, and then at some point, maybe someone from leadership comes in and says like, hey, hold on, what is this thing we're spending? It might be time, it might be cloud cost, it might be people. What is this? Why are we doing this? And it can happen the other way as well, right? Like we take something top down and the developers are like, what is this thing? I don't understand why it's here. And we have to
Yeah.
kind of sit in the middle of those two, take the leadership context and the developer context and try and meet in the middle.
Do you see similar challenges when you when you know, assuming Gitpod is in the CDE world, do you see similar challenges in adoption of CDEs, or are they kind of different than adoption of portals and interfaces for self-service?
I think every tool, every solution built or bought is going to have some form of adoption curve to it, which is why in this talk, I'm sort of stressing very much it's really important. And we have this even with our customers and prospective customers. We want to make sure that they have the problem that we solve for, right? And probably also for the portals as well. There's no point us giving a solution to something that's not a particularly painful problem. All that ends up happening there is then the customer doesn't use the solution or it doesn't roll out. So it's just really important, especially from our side, that we really quantify, even with the customers, do you have this problem? Are you committed to rolling this out? Do you have the resource to do this? Because even the most hands-off product takes some sort of resource and headspace, and you've got all these opportunities, right? All these different angles you can go down within an organization, cost reduction or security, etc. And they can all take headspace. So yeah, it's really important. We kind of really strongly try and get that agreement with the customer. Like, hey, are you committed to this? Are you putting time towards this? Is this really a problem for you? And then kind of going forward. So
Great. So thank you. And I'll be ending the webinar, and we have one last session for the day, starting in half an hour, so everybody can take a long break. Thank you, Lou.
awesome. Thank you very much, Ronnie. Thank you very much, folks. Enjoy the rest of the conference.